Welcome back to Chatterbox and welcome to another reaction. Now, today, let me straight off by saying Happy Independence Day. We salute you. Congratulations. Now, before I introduce what we'll be reacting to today, let me straight off by introducing the team. As you can see, it's a three-man team. It's the man, the myth, the legend, the guy who hasn't been around for at least 2 years. Is no other than ladies love Andre. How you doing? You good?
Yo, what's going on? Yeah, all good, man. I'm back. I'm ready for these reactions. Yes, let's do this.
People will be glad to actually see you on screen instead of just on their TV and on their billboards and on the internet and doing your Facebook thing. Hey, he's finally back with us. And we have the South London skanker, Sean. How you doing? You good?
Hey, what's going on, people? Yeah, man, I'm good. Like you said, good to have Ladies Love back with us. Yeah, man, good to see him again, brightening the screen with his smiles. Like, yeah, man, it's all good.
Today we'll be reacting to what India needs to learn from the Chinese economic crisis. Now, I've seen a few people react to this, and it was something that I thought could be quite interesting, and it was something I thought, let me bring to you guys and let us check this out. So you guys ready?
Yep.
All right, let's check it out.
Right now, there are hundreds of unfinished apartment towers across China.
Social media footage shows crowds protesting in front of the offices of the Chinese real estate developer Evergrande.
Now the big risk comes from property, where developers are crumbling under mountains of debt.
Analysts fear the crisis could spread throughout China's property sector and the entire economy.
The Communist Party is paranoid. It is obsessed with internal security.
So the question is, will the Chinese government step in and act as a backstop?
Hi everybody, China is witnessing one of the most challenging economic crises in its history. The real estate market, which accounts for nearly 30% of its GDP, has come crashing down in the past 1 year. Property sales plummeted by 72%, and thousands of people are now protesting in 86 cities. And now, there is a banking crisis whereby banks have started freezing the accounts of the depositors. And in spite of all this trouble, experts say that this is just the beginning of one of the worst economic crises that is to follow in China. The question is, why is China at the brink of an economic crisis? What exactly went wrong with the real estate market of China? And most importantly, what are the lessons that India needs to learn from this Chinese economic crisis? This video is brought to you by Cuckoo FM, but more on this at the end of the video. The story of China's real estate bubble dates way back to the early 2000s. During this time, China was an ultra-fast growing country. This is when the manufacturing revolution of China was at its peak, wherein companies from all across the world were setting up their manufacturing hubs in the cities of China. Before this time, China was just another agricultural nation with very little to nothing to do with globalization. So, if you look at urbanization in China, after 1995, huge chunks of population started moving from the rural places to the cities of China. So back then, only 29% of the population was living in the cities. But after 1995, you will see that the population in the cities skyrocketed to nearly 50% of the entire population. And today, 63.89% of the Chinese population, as in nearly 900 million people, live in the cities. Now the catch over here is that in China, unlike in India, you cannot own a land. So the entire land of China is owned by the state and can only be given on a lease to the builders and developers. So when so many people started migrating to the cities, the demand for houses skyrocketed. And when demand for a product skyrockets, what happens? The price of the product increases and more players jump into the market to cater to the rising demand. So not so surprisingly, hundreds of developers flooded into the Chinese market to meet this demand. And this is where we saw the massive rise of Chinese real estate developers. Now, as we all know, construction is an extremely capital-intensive business. So these companies first of all took heavy loans on the banks to pay the heavy leasing amount to the state. Then they took even heavier loans to build these buildings and started selling them to the people of China. Now, from the Chinese bank standpoint, construction was an amazing business to lend to. Why? Because there was already over demand in the market. The business had a healthy profit margin of 15 to 20% in spite of being a high-ticket business. And most importantly, from the state's perspective, it generates a lot of employment, profits a huge supply chain of steel, glass, cement, brick and hundreds of other suppliers, and eventually makes a huge contribution to the GDP of China by giving jobs to many workers. In fact, this is the reason why real estate contributed to almost 30% of the Chinese gross domestic product. This is the reason why banks kept on lending, the developers kept on building, and the people of China kept on buying houses. And due to this increasing demand, the price of houses increased, so more lending, more developers, and more sales. And this is why, ladies and gentlemen, the property boom in the Chinese economy started. As a result, the real estate prices in China started shooting to new peaks, making the Chinese cities some of the most expensive cities in the world. Now, just to give you an idea about how bad the condition is, there is this index called price to income ratio to understand the affordability of houses in a particular locality. It's nothing but the ratio of the price of an average apartment to the median household income of that particular place. So if this index is 10 for New York, it means that it would take 10 years of the median household income to buy an apartment in New York. So while a median New York household needs 9.92 years of income to buy an apartment, in London it's 17.3 years, in Mumbai it's 26 years, whereas in Beijing it's 56 years. And even in other Chinese cities, it's more than 35 years. Now the question over here is, if the price of these houses was so high, why were the Chinese still buying houses? Couldn't they just rent an apartment? Well, here's where, apart from urbanization, there are two more reasons why the Chinese were buying houses in spite of high prices. Number one, just like in India, even in China, you will be respected as a well-settled person only if you own a house. So if you're a man who does not own a house in China, the family will be too hesitant to get their daughter married to you. Secondly, just like gold is our go-to investment in India, for the Chinese people, property was the best investment instrument in the market. And just like our elders refrain from stock investing, even the Chinese people consider stocks to be dangerous and real estate to be extremely safe. And if you look at the increasing prices of the houses in China, it kind of looks like it was a great investment instrument. Cherry on the cake, there is zero property tax on buying private residential places in China. And you know what, guys? In the race of this social norm, GDP and property boom, the Chinese developers built so many buildings that today there are buildings for 90 million people that are completely vacant. To put that into perspective, that is more than the entire population of France, Germany, Italy, UK, and even Canada. And this led to the creation of what we know today as the ghost cities of China. Take a look.
These are China's ghost cities, sprawling, empty spaces.
City meant for thousands of people that's just completely empty.
Many Chinese cities constantly conducting real estate development in pursuit of GDP growth simply turn urbanization into building houses and cities. But their floor areas and increase in population are out of sync, leading to the ghost city phenomenon.
And guess what? Most of these apartments are already owned by the people in the hope that the real estate prices will go up and their investments will appreciate. This is why, ladies and gentlemen, the government of China realized that they are in a super bubble where developers are borrowing dangerous sums of money to keep feeding the real estate bubble of China. So they came up with something called the 3 red line policy, whereby they put forth 3 criteria that the large real estate developers in China are supposed to clear. And only if they clear these criteria, they can extend their debts with the bank. These 3 criteria are liability to asset ratio of less than 70%, net gearing ratio of less than 100%, and cash to short-term debt ratio of at least 1. Now this is a little complex, but don't worry, you don't have to understand all this. All you need to know is that if all 3 criteria are passed, then the company can increase its debt up to 15%. And as you keep breaching a criteria, the percentage at which your debt can grow will be decreased to 10%, 5%, and then to 0%. And as soon as this announcement was done, all the real estate developers started cutting down on their expenses and started optimizing their finances. But, while many medium and small scale developers fulfilled this criteria, as it turns out, the second largest real estate developer in China crossed all 3 lines. And this company is named China Evergrande Group.
Evergrande borrowed a lot of money, what we call offshore, in international financial markets, and it's probably not going to pay it back.
China Evergrande is the most indebted real estate developer in China.
Evergrande is a ticking time bomb, and it's about to blow up in the face of foreign investors. In other words, if this company fails, it hits 171 domestic banks in China.
Now the question is, what exactly is wrong with Evergrande and why has a single company triggered such a massive unrest all across the country? Well, the story of Evergrande is pretty straightforward and astounding at the same time. The founder of the company saw the real estate wave, started the company to serve the over demand of homes, took a ton of loans from the banks, built huge buildings and sold them and made a lot of money. But the problem was that they were growing and borrowing at such a rapid pace that it started to get more and more dangerous. And if you look at the numbers, within just 10 years, they went from a revenue of 45.8 billion yuan to 507 billion yuan. This is mind-blowing, right? But you know what, guys? Behind the scenes, they used all this debt not to complete the existing projects, but kept on funding new projects before the existing ones got sold out. So you will see that in this graph, from 2010 onwards, after they started expanding, the gap between the properties under development, contracted sales and completed projects started increasing. And as you can see, by 2021, it had already touched a dangerous level, whereby the completed projects held for sales were barely 1/6 of the properties under development. And as a result of this super fast growth fueled by a mountain of debt, Evergrande ended up crossing all 3 red lines in the policy. And now they can no longer extend their debt with the banks. And this is where, ladies and gentlemen, the chain reaction starts. Now the question is, it's just another company that would go out of business, right? Then how is it possible that a single company going down can affect the growth of the second largest economy in the world? Well, here's where you need to know about a category of companies that are said to be too big to fail. In this case, if you see, Evergrande is not the only player to get affected. They are yet to pay bills worth $100 billion to their suppliers. This includes steel suppliers, cement suppliers, paint suppliers, trucking companies, brick suppliers and thousands of other vendors. And now that these supplies won't be paid, it directly affects their suppliers and their balance sheet. Secondly, the banks that have given out loans to Evergrande, they cannot get their money back unless all these Evergrande projects are sold out. But as we saw, most of these projects are still under development and the news of Evergrande has already sent shockwaves across the market. So now no one is going to buy those incomplete apartments, right? And what's even worse is that since these incomplete projects cannot be completed without more loans, even the people who have paid for the apartments cannot get their house or will lose their money altogether. And you know what, guys? These angry home buyers are now waiting on as many as 1.6 million apartments. And many of these people have also taken out loans, and now all home buyers are threatening not to pay mortgage on their loan at all. And if they don't pay the banks will have to write down $220 billion of mortgage loans, which will put them in a disaster. Fun fact, mortgage loans account for 20% of all loans in China. So you can imagine how bad the condition is. And you know what? Evergrande did not just borrow from banks, they also raised billions of dollars from the common people through bonds. And now even those people will lose money. And the most insane fact of all is that as of October 2021 itself, 2/3 of the top 30 Chinese property firms have breached at least one of the metrics in the 3 red line policy. Which means more defaulting, more companies going out of business, more defaulting customers, and more loss for suppliers, and ultimately the collapse of one of the biggest sectors of the Chinese economy. This is the reason why there is so much chaos in China. Now what remains to be seen is how will the Chinese tackle this crisis and how will it prevent itself from a catastrophe. And this brings me to the last part of the episode, and that are lessons that India needs to learn from this Chinese economic crisis. Before we move on, I want to thank our partners Cuckoo FM for supporting our content. People, if you're someone who wants to learn more about business and geopolitics in your own regional language, you must listen to the fantastic audiobooks on Cuckoo FM app. Cuckoo FM is India's largest vernacular audio learning platform with over 1,000 plus hours of content in their library with 4.5-star rating and a ton of insightful audiobooks in multiple regional languages. In this case, if you're fascinated by the rise of China, you could listen to this audiobook called The Rise of China or this audiobook called China and India, Asia's Emergent Great Powers. So if these kind of subjects intrigue you, then use the code THINK50 to get a 50% discount on the Cuckoo FM subscription. This is applicable only for the first 1,000 people, so go ahead, use the link in the description and download the Cuckoo FM app now. Moving on to the lessons, the first thing we need to learn from this Chinese crisis is that investment instruments driven by mindless social norms will often cost both the people and the economy heavily. In this case, the Chinese definition of a well-settled person got a ton of debt piled up for the Chinese people in spite of the sky-high prices. So you see, in spite of it not making any economic sense, because of the social construct, it has now put millions of people's lives at stake. In our case in India, the same thing happened with FDs because we outright considered FDs to be safe because of the social norm without understanding inflation. Similarly, the mindless purchase of gold is now hindering our economy. So take a step back and assess whether your instruments are backed by calculated strategy or just mindless social norms. Number 2, piling up of debt of any company might showcase accelerated growth in the beginning, but with today's volatile, uncertain and chaotic market conditions, it comes at the risk of everything falling apart at once. In our case, just like Evergrande, the Adani Group is taking up a huge amount of debt. And like I said in the previous episode, it sounds both risky and genius to me. And as much as we must vouch for Indian businessmen to prosper and become the pillars of our economy, we must also keep an eye on the implications in case they start defaulting. And just like China had a huge supply chain, banks and people that got affected, if a huge business group in India starts defaulting, even our economy will face troubles. So be careful with that. And thirdly, with China being a monopoly with solar components and cobalt, because the Chinese banks have curtailed the lending, the cost of these trades to India might actually keep increasing. So keep an eye on your solar.
Okay. Before I start, let me thank Kuko FM for what they provided for. You can send some of the donations this way. Wow, that was a lot to digest. Let's start with you, Sean. What do you think?
Well, like you said, a lot to digest, but that's really scary, man. And when I think of like all the people's lives that are going to be affected by this economic downturn, I think it's really like sad as well, because obviously these people got into this business, and again, I'm not even really thinking about the corporate folk in relation to the investments and stuff. I'm talking about like, you know, the families. Like I think at one point I heard him say there was like 1.9 million properties that people were waiting for, that they already took a mortgage out on, and they couldn't, like, you know, get their property, which was bizarre on its own.
Imagine paying a mortgage for a property you don't have.
Yeah, that's just insane. So, you know, and remember, these people still have to live as well. They still got like pay all their bills and things like that. So yeah, that's crazy stuff, man. And I mean, to me, it's all like news because I didn't know any of this.
But it's funny how it doesn't go on BBC or none of these channels. We don't hear about it.
I think a lot of it, maybe I'm wrong, but my understanding of the way that the media works is pretty much they put out what they want to put out, depending on what results they want. So if they don't want people to stop spending, they're not going to scare people, are they? So it's one of those things where maybe, I'm not sure, with the economy at the moment, obviously inflation's pretty high, even here in the UK. It's affecting a lot of families at the moment. So clearly, you know, there's a lot of economic troubles all around the world. This one seems of epic proportions, which will have a knock-on effect on the rest of us as well, because a lot of our supply does come from China, to be fair. So when you're seeing things like, you know, supplies going to be hit as well by this, and then you've got the knock-on effect of all the banks and the safe, what they call, you know, safe companies when you talk about investments and the stock markets and stuff like that. And as you can clearly see, that's not the case, because you know, it was all fabricated, you know, the success of these economies. So yeah, really interesting, really like thought-provoking, eye-opening for me. Just gives me a little bit more of an insight into why all these whispers of the global economy is so you know, negative at the moment. So yeah.
Ladies love.
Yeah, so it was too long, the video, and it was, yeah, it's not really my thing. So what they were talking about and the housing stuff and some technical things, my mind was wandering throughout most of the beginning of the video. I was going back and forth, and like sometimes I was coming back in and I was out, and my mind was just in other places because it was just not my type of thing, and it was boring, it felt, until it wasn't, when it got to Evergrande stuff. And then for some reason I was interested, and I was clicking and I was listening to everything, and I was like, okay, this is happening. And so that was really interesting about Evergrande. And yeah, I like, me, in my limited head, limited intellect or whatever, just common sense, didn't understand why they would do that with a company and or with companies and give them all that money, and then it just doesn't make sense to me. But they do what they do, innit? And so it was just interesting and heartbreaking for people that like Sean said, not the company people, like the people out on the streets, like getting their buying their houses or giving money or lending money or borrowing money. I mean, and then just like it's not there, and what are they gonna do? And I'm like, no, that's you're messing with people's life. Like that's why they're protesting. That's why they might riot and stuff like that, because you can't be doing that with people's lives. You can't be doing that. So
and they refuse to pay their mortgage now. They're like, yeah, we're not gonna pay. We're not gonna pay.
The same thing. Like if you're doing that to me, you're trying to end me. You're trying to end me. So why am I paying this? Like if you're doing this to my life, why am I paying this money? Why am I trying to kill myself even more by paying this money? Nah, I'm not doing that. I would do the exact same thing. So so all that was interesting. So it's like a tale of two halves for me personally watching this. So it was really interesting. Second half. So cool.
And the thing was as well was the knock-on effect of the people who's obviously suffering. They then default on the mortgage, but then there's another knock-on effect, which is that once that defaults, then the bank is in another deficit of like however many hundreds of millions, which means even more problems. So it's just the whole thing's just a mess, man. That is
other countries as well. Like you said, it's in other countries, so it's madness.
Well, the thing about it is, maybe this was a little bit of my ignorance. I thought China was such a huge power that this wouldn't happen to a company in China. I'm shocked. I heard some rumbles on a website called China Uncovered. It kind of features different things on China, but you don't really see on BBC News or ITV. So you don't see a lot of this. And then you see a video like this and you're like, wow, is it this bad? Is it having this impact? And one thing I've learned is when something bad happens in China, you know the shit's going to roll downhill. So you're wondering, who's at the bottom of this hill? Because I know China has a lot of claws in a lot of countries, and how is it going to impact them, such as my beloved Jamaica, which China virtually owns, a lot of countries in Africa. So what is going to happen, and how is it going to impact the rest of the world? I know it's impacting the citizens out there, and you can see how hard it's taking them, and it's that huge knock. But wow, what is it going to do to the rest of the world, and how is it going to affect a lot of us in a day-to-day? And I know that it's kind of selfish looking outside of China, but you're just like, wow, I can't believe it. And what was crazy was the ghost cities. That blew my mind. Ghost cities. There's places built that are not complete, that are just there. And you're like, if it was me, man, I'll just go with some 2x4s and some plywood and just turn one of those places into my own complex, man.
But remember, they had that in the just quickly. Remember, they had that in the 2008 recession. So don't forget about that. So even in London, it was a known fact that there was a lot of these high-rise buildings that was built in like East London, all throughout the city, that would have like one person living on a whole floor because they couldn't get. Say again?
You're frozen.
You froze a little bit. Yeah.
What did you say? Sorry, Andre.
Oh no, because I was going to say in I think there's still places that are just empty now, isn't it? Here.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
No.
So that's what I'm saying, because Pete's talking about the ghost cities. I'm saying it's something that we've seen before, even in England. So it's a known thing that can happen, and it's just due to investment. People to make more money, they want their profit margins to be a lot higher, so they take that big gamble because they know it's a high risk, high reward. So it's the bait's there for people, and they don't even really think about the repercussions of how it trickles down and affects like the less fortunate, unfortunately. So
yeah, we're watching this video, but like look what's going on here anyway, like with the cost of living and all that stuff. So boy
Yeah, the funny thing about cost of living has gone up so much. Like you go to the shop and they think they're smart. They leave a lot of the products the same price, but the amount of food inside the product is less. So you go and like buy peanuts, instead of there be 12 peanuts, there's now 4 for the same price.
Yeah.
And you're like, everything is just ripping you off. You're just getting robbed left, right, and center.
Like
so you
Chris,
now have
the packet it's not even worth it. Like now,
you open a bag of crisps and half of it is air. You're like, what? You open peanuts now and it's just shells. They even took the peanuts out of the shells and put them somewhere else.
I know this is first world problems, but still, man, still.
But like even when you order something online, you buy it and it's at a decent price, and then you realize that postage and packaging will cost just as much.
Yep.
So, hey, well, we could talk on and on and on, and we could explore this in so many different angles and look at it from so many different perspectives. Wow. What do you think of that video, subscribers? Are you shocked? Were you shocked when you saw it for the first time? He mentioned a lot of things about Indian gold. Are you investing in Indian gold? If you've invested in Indian gold and you want to send it to somebody in Chatterbox crew, just let us know. We'll give you our postal address. We do like Indian gold, okay? We do celebrate with Indian gold. But anyway, this is myself, P. Ladies love Andre, Sean, and that's us for now. Peace.